Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Annie. La la la. Hello and welcome to this episode of Happy Baking. In this episode, I am going to be making my perfect vanilla cake. This is a super moist and fluffy cake that is perfect for birthdays or any kind of celebration. And in fact, I'm going to be going to a surprise birthday today to deliver this cake to a special recipient. I received a fun email in my inbox from someone who lives locally here in Kansas City, saying that it was her daughter's birthday coming up and she wondered if there was any chance that she could do a meet and greet with me or buy some kind of baked good. I wrote back to her and said it sounded like so much fun, especially if she'd let me bring my happy baking crew along to capture it all. I'm a serious vanilla lover. I even have a vanilla bean tattooed on my arm. And sometimes I think this flavor is just used as an accompaniment. And in this cake, I really want to let it shine all on its own. So this will be a triple vanilla cake. We have a vanilla bean cake, a silky smooth vanilla bean custard inside, and a vanilla bean white chocolate buttercream to finish it off. It's going to be a delicious happy birthday episode and I can't wait. So let's get baking. Let's get started making our perfect vanilla cake layers. This cake is super soft, super fluffy, super moist. It is perfect for a layer cake because it's the kind of thing that your fork just glides right through. I love this cake, I make it a lot. It's a classic creaming method cake, but before we even get started creaming our butter and sugar, I wanna just whisk our dry ingredients together. I've got all-purpose flour, baking powder, and fine sea salt. And I'm just gonna whisk those together so it's ready when we need it. You may have heard this before, but sometimes whisking is really a sufficient replacement for sifting, because really what we're doing is both trying to combine these dry ingredients and also slightly aerate them. The action of the whisk does this in a very similar way to sifting. The difference being that all-purpose flour isn't as prone to clumping up as something like cake flour, so we can kind of get away with just doing the whisk here. All right, I'll set that aside until we need it. Let's get started creaming our butter and sugar. My butter is nice and soft at room temperature. If it's kind of cold where you are, I recommend giving it a little bit of room temperature help. I do this by placing the butter sticks wrapped in the microwave just for about 5 to 10 seconds. Cake batter in general can be kind of prone to splitting or separating because we are adding a lot of liquid to it between the eggs and some of the other liquid that we're gonna add into the mixture. So to help prevent that separation, making sure we're using really soft butter is one of the things that will really, really help us. The first thing I'll do is mix the butter just on low speed for a moment, just to get it a little bit lightened before I even add the sugar. After I get it a little bit lightened and I kind of see it smoothly in the bottom of the bowl, I'll give it a scrape and we'll add our sugar and we'll start creaming. Okay. So you can just see even the color of the butter on this paddle, it's lightened just a little bit. It was a little more yellow before. We're not trying to get a ton of aeration. I'm just truly trying to lighten it a little bit before I add this sugar. Now I'll go ahead and add all of the granulated sugar. I'll mix this on medium speed to cream this mixture until it is light and fluffy, about 4 to 5 minutes. Okay, this is looking really great. You can see how light and fluffy it is. It's completely changed in texture and we've got really, really pale white sort of color. That's great. I'm gonna give it a quick scrape before we continue. The next step is gonna be to add our eggs. And in this recipe, to keep this like a true white cake, vanilla cake, we are gonna use only egg whites. But don't worry, because the egg yolks are going to be appearing in the custard filling that we will use to fill this cake. So we're still gonna use the whole egg, we're just only gonna use the whites for the cake. So I'll separate the eggs, saving the yolks for later. This is not a time where it's necessarily important. Oh look, see? Just as I was saying it too. I got a tiny little bit of yolk in my egg white mixture. I am gonna try to fish it out here, but this is not a time where a little bit of yolk matters the way that it matters when you're making something like meringue. When you're making something like meringue, A tiny bit of fat in the egg white mixture can completely prevent it from whipping up properly. In this case, the reason that we're only using egg whites is just for the old end texture of the cake, and also to keep the crumb structure as light and white and vanilla looking as possible. So if you get a little bit of yolk in, don't worry about it. The biggest thing that we're concerned about is having, the right amount of egg whites. When you're storing egg whites, you can usually just put them in an airtight container, but egg yolks are really prone to drying out. So whenever you're storing them, it's ideal to press something directly against the surface of the egg yolks just to make sure they don't dry out. Since we're not going to use these egg yolks till later when we make our custard, I want to make sure that they're nice and safe. I'm going to put these in the fridge for now. I'm going to start adding these eggs gradually in about 2 to 3 additions. And after each one is incorporated, I'll scrape really, really well just to make sure that there's no buttery, sugary bits at the bottom of the bowl that are not mixing in with the whole mixture, really trying to make this homogeneous. That's so important with the creaming method. After I get all the eggs in, I'll also add some vanilla bean paste and a slightly secret ingredient, some almond extract. Now, this almond extract is listed as optional in the recipe because I know it's not everybody's favorite, or if you don't have it, don't feel like you can't make this cake without almond extract. But this is something that my mom used to do to vanilla cakes when I was growing up, and it gives it this like creaminess. It's really, really lovely, and we're only adding a tiny, tiny bit. I always find when I do it in my vanilla cake, people are like, wow, this cake is so good. What's in this? I'm always like, it's just that little bit of almond extract. I think it makes a difference. So even though this is a vanilla cake and we're adding a lot of vanilla bean paste, we're still gonna add a little bit of almond extract too. Now we just need to alternate adding our dry ingredients and our wet ingredients. For the wet ingredients, I have whole milk at room temperature. Again, this is really important to help prevent breaking that cake batter. When you break a cake batter, it can look a little bit like separated or scrambled eggy, and we just want it to be as smooth and silky as possible. I also have a bit of vegetable oil here. Now, obviously there was already butter in here, but the vegetable oil is gonna help keep this cake even more moist. So we're going to add it in with the whole milk. So I'll just whisk those two ingredients together before we continue. And we already whisked our dry ingredients together. So I'll start by adding some of the dry ingredients. And I wanna add this in about 3 additions, and then I will alternate by adding about 2 additions of the wet ingredients. I wanna start with dry ingredients and end with dry ingredients. That gives us the best chance of not separating the batter, and also if the batter does separate, each time you add dry ingredients, you kind of have a chance to bring it back together. So by ending with the dry ingredients, in case we have some kind of disaster, hopefully we'll be able to end in the perfect spot. I'll just mix on low speed to combine these ingredients. I want to focus on not over mixing once I start incorporating the dry ingredients. Cake batter looks good. We just need to prepare our cake pans. I've got 3 9-inch cake pans and 3 parchment circles, 9-inch parchment circles. You can buy these pre-cut, which is what I have, or you can cut them yourself out of the parchment paper you have by tracing the bottom of your cake pan. I'm just gonna spray each of these with nonstick spray, the base and the sides. And then I'll line each with the cake circle. And then once they're lined, I'll also spray the surface of the paper with a little nonstick spray, just for some extra protection. There's 2 ways that you can make sure that your cake layers have an even amount of batter in them. One of them that I often do is to use an ice cream scoop, and that way I can just plop in each pan at a time. But another way is to use one of my favorite tools in all of baking, the kitchen scale. So that's what I'm gonna do today. What I'll do is I'll start by putting just kind of, you can weigh your entire amount of batter and do the math of how to divide it. But usually what I do is I just start by putting, 300 grams in each, and then continue to add until I'm at a similar number for each one. Like I said, you can always do the math if your brain works a little bit better that way. But I just like doing this because when you're making a layer cake, It's helpful to have the layers be fairly even right from the get-go. I've preheated the oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit, 175 degrees Celsius with an oven rack in the center. I'll bake all 3 cakes on that center rack until a toothpick inserted into the center comes out clean or with just a few moist crumbs. This will take about 30 to 34 minutes. One of the things that I love in a great layer cake is different textures between the cake, the filling, and the frosting. And while a lot of layer cakes just use the frosting as the filling, I think that when you're making an extra special, extra perfect cake, it can be nice to make a separate filling just to add even more flavor and another luxurious silky texture into the mix. So for this cake, I am making a vanilla custard filling, and this has a bonus of being able to use up the egg yolks from when we made our cake. So it's a win-win-win-win-win-win-win-win, vanilla bean win. Okay, best of all, custards are really simple to make. I'm a big custard fan, so we'll start by adding our whole milk and heavy cream into a pot. I'm gonna turn that on medium heat and let it come to a simmer. While it comes to a simmer, we'll mix some of our other ingredients together. First, I'm going to add my granulated sugar to a bowl. I also want to point out that the bowl that I'm going to mix this in needs to be a heat-safe bowl because eventually we're going to add some of this hot liquid into it, just a little bit, but we want to make sure we're using something like a heat-safe glass or ceramic bowl or a metal bowl, something like that. I'm also going to add my cornstarch to that granulated sugar, and I'll whisk it to combine. I think I say in the recipe actually to put the salt in with the milk and cream, so I'm gonna add that now. It hasn't even really started to heat up yet, just to help it dissolve. You could really add the salt at any of these points in this recipe, just as long as there's salt in there, because we wanna make sure we've got some flavor going on in our custard. You may have heard me talk about this before. This is a technique that I like to use almost any time I'm adding a starch thickener to something that is warm. I like to use the granulated sugar to help break up any clumps in the starch, and it also helps to disperse that starch more evenly. When any kind of starch, cornstarch or flour, anything hits hot liquid, it has a tendency to clump up. That's why a lot of recipes will have you mix it in with cool liquid before you heat it. But it is possible to add it to already warm liquid. You just need to be very aware and give it a little extra help, and the granulated sugar does just that. Once our milk and cream mixture gets a little bit warmer, I'm also going to add the egg yolks into this mixture, but I don't want to do it too soon. Sugar is hygroscopic, which means it has the ability to pull moisture out of things. So when we add eggs into something that has a sugar base, it can start to firm up little bits of the egg, particularly the egg yolk, in a way that can make it gritty or clumpy. In fact, some people think that the sugar is cooking the egg yolks, and that's not really true, but what it's doing is it's pulling the moisture out of it. This is the same technique when you do salt-cured egg yolks. Salt is also hygroscopic, and that's how that egg yolk sets to be a firm texture, is the salt pulls all the moisture out of those egg yolks. But that's a time when we're trying to do it intentionally. In this case, we want silky smoothness. So once I start to see that this is getting hot, that's when I'll add the eggs in. But if I do it too soon and leave it sitting on the counter, we could end up with clumpy egg yolks where we don't want them. I'm using vanilla bean paste to flavor this mixture. You can also use a vanilla bean. You'll want to cut it in half and scrape the seeds out. Okay, I'm starting to see almost a skin form on the surface of my liquid, which is a sign that it is about to simmer. So I'll go ahead and take the plastic off the surface of these egg yolks and mix them into my sugar and starch mixture. I want to keep this whisk handy, but I also want to have a silicone spatula nearby. I also want to have something to strain my final custard into, a heat-safe bowl, and I've got a strainer or sieve placed over it because I'm going to strain the custard too, just to make sure that we end up with the silkiest, smoothest, most luxurious custard ever. Okay, I'm starting to see bubbles around the outside edge. That's warm enough that I can go ahead and start this process. What I'm gonna do is pour about 1/4 of this warm liquid into this egg mixture. No need to be precise, but what we're doing, oops, I spilled a little. What we're doing is tempering this mixture. Tempering in this case means actually adjusting the temperature, because what we have here is room temperature sugar and cornstarch, and maybe even slightly cold egg yolks, and we're adding hot liquid to it. If you add hot liquid to something cold or room temperature, it has a tendency to not respond in the best way. We might accidentally cook or scramble some of those egg yolks. We definitely want to avoid that. We don't want that flavor of cooked egg that's scrambled in any way firm. We don't want that texture. By adding a small amount of the warm liquid to this, we adjust the temperature slowly. Now I can add it back into the pot with less fear of scrambling it unintentionally. I'm just gonna add it back in while whisking constantly. Again, without keeping it in motion, we run the risk of accidentally cooking some of those eggs. Okay, that's looking pretty good. I'm gonna turn the pot back on, sort of a medium-low heat. And what I wanna do, like I said, keep this spatula handy, but at the beginning, I usually keep using the whisk just to make sure I'm keeping it in motion, and I'm gonna end up with a really silky custard. Eventually, as it starts to thicken, I wanna switch to that spatula because it helps me make sure I'm scraping the edges of the pot, especially the bottom corners of the pot. That's where it has a tendency to start to cook and thicken faster, and we can end up with kind of some clumps. Okay, it's starting to thicken. You can see it's already starting to coat my spatula, but we wanna keep cooking it. I'm gonna switch to the spatula now. I wanna keep cooking it. Oop, it's already starting to happen. I wanna keep cooking it till I start to see some fat bubbles rising more from the center of the pot. I'm not looking for small, tiny bubbles around the outer edge. I really am looking for big bubbles to break the surface. And that is because there is actually a naturally occurring enzyme in eggs that consumes starch. So if you don't cook this enough to kind of kill that enzyme, and I know kill is a strong word, but we need to heat it appropriately so that enzyme is taken care of. Otherwise, what will happen is your custard will look thick and creamy when you finish cooking it, but as it cools down in the refrigerator, it will actually start to get liquid again because that enzyme will consume the starch that you put in this recipe. But like, look how thick and creamy it's getting now. Oop, there's some big fat bubbles. Yes. One last ingredient we want to add to this. We're going to add just a couple tablespoons of butter. This is obviously for flavor and an unctuous, delicious texture. But really what it's about is also starting to cool this down just a smidge. Obviously, a few tablespoons of butter aren't going to cool it down entirely, but it will help kind of stop the cooking process because we're adding something cold into the mix. I'm just gonna stir until that's completely combined. Then it's straining time. Let's strain it. And this straining, obviously, if you haven't cooked any of the egg yolks, you shouldn't really have any clumps. But one thing that you will be able to successfully strain out is any little bits from the egg. Like when you're separating the egg, there is a part of the egg called the chalazi, which is like that white fibrous bit. And we can kind of strain that out if there was any attached to the egg yolks still. The final step is to cover the surface directly with plastic wrap because as this cools, it's prone to forming a skin because of that starch. We want to keep it all the same texture, so we'll cover the surface directly. I'll let it cool at room temperature for a little while, and then I'll transfer it to the refrigerator to cool completely. Okay, my cakes are done. A tester inserted into the center came out clean or with just a couple moist crumbs. I can also see it's browned around the edges and starting to pull slightly away from the cake pan. One thing I want you to notice is that with this particular cake, because it is so moist, it doesn't really spring back when you touch it. But I know it's done from those other kind of indicators. I let it cool for about 5 to 10 minutes in the pan, and then I invert it onto a cooling rack while it's still warm to cool completely. I can just peel away this paper too. Beautiful. The frosting for this vanilla cake is one of my all-time favorite frostings. I refer to it as sweetened condensed milk buttercream, but sometimes it's also known as Russian buttercream. The reason that I love it so much is that this buttercream is as easy to make as something like American buttercream, which is just butter and powdered sugar. But American buttercream has kind of not a silky smooth texture, and it also is so sweet. But what I love about sweetened condensed milk buttercream is it's just the right amount of sweetness and it is creamier. It's just so good, but it's just as easy to make in my opinion. There are just a couple of little things to look out for and to help you troubleshoot to get the perfect frosting every time. I'm gonna start with butter. Now, I wanna preface this. Yes, this is a lot of butter, but this is also a really big cake, and I am really putting a lot of decorations on this cake. Piping details, toppers. So I would rather have extra icing than run out in the middle of cake making, which, as you know, is just any baker's worst nightmare. So this is plenty of frosting. If we end up having any left over, the frosting will freeze and it can be reconstituted and used for another baking project down the line. And if we use all of it, it's gonna be 4 sticks of butter delicious. I'm gonna go ahead and put the butter, which is soft, room temperature. It's really important that it's not just butter that's been sitting at room temperature, but that it is soft. You should be able, when you touch the butter, it should squish like that. What we're gonna do first is whip this butter on high speed for quite a while. Basically, the whole basis of this frosting depends on super aerated butter before we can add any of the other ingredients. If we don't aerate it enough, once we start adding the sweetened condensed milk, it might be more prone to breaking, and it just might take it longer to come together to create a really nice smooth mixture. I'm gonna start whipping it at medium speed and eventually raise the speed to high. I need to whip it until it is almost white in color. It's gonna take 7 to 8 minutes. Okay, this has started to get lightened already, but I actually forgot to add 2 ingredients, and I also want to point something out. You can see that some of the butter is still yellow and more solid up towards the edge and maybe even around some of the base. So every now and then at the early stages, it can be nice to give it a good scrape just to really make sure that all of the butter is getting aerated and not just the same portion being mixed around the center of the bowl. Now, when I put it back on the mixer, I want to include 2 other ingredients, the fine sea salt and our vanilla bean paste. That way the 2 can just mix together to combine and really be even throughout this, even before we start adding the sweetened condensed milk. Back to whipping on medium-high speed until it is almost completely white and very fluffy. Okay, this is looking great. As you can see, I mentioned it was white in color. I mean, very technically, because I added so much vanilla bean paste, it's a slightly ivory, but it's a lot whiter than the yellow butter that we had before. And also the texture has changed completely. It almost already looks like a spreadable frosting right now without adding any more ingredients to it. That's really what you're looking for. So I'm just gonna give it a good scrape and make sure as much of the frosting is off of our whip as possible. Scrape really well to the bottom of the bowl. I'm gonna now, with the mixer running, start adding that sweetened condensed milk in a slow, steady stream, letting it incorporate on about medium speed as it's adding. Okay, all of the sweetened condensed milk has been incorporated. Visually, it kind of looks like the butter did before the sweetened condensed milk was incorporated. It's still really light, fluffy. It's super silky, smooth, and creamy. There's one more ingredient I wanna add to it, and this is actually kind of a general tip that I can advise you that you can do to your favorite frosting recipe in a lot of cases. In most buttercreams, it's possible to add melted chocolate to them at the end of mixing. Even if the recipe doesn't call for it, a lot of buttercream recipes this will work with. Adding chocolate of any kind gives like an additional softness, creaminess. In this case, of course, I'm not using bittersweet or semi-sweet or any kind of dark or milk chocolate. I'm using white chocolate, which of course isn't really chocolate at all. It's basically vanilla, cocoa butter. It's just gonna amplify the vanilla and the creaminess of this frosting even more than if we just made the sweetened condensed milk buttercream alone. What I'm gonna do is just melt it in the microwave in 30-second bursts. As it gets more and more melted, I'll cut it down to 10 seconds. And I'm gonna stir in between each. When it's about 80 to 85% melted, usually just stirring it will melt the remaining chocolate. I bring that up especially with white chocolate because it does have a tendency to burn if you heat it too much. So just keep an eye on it. You can always stop a little bit shy and just let the heat of your bowl and the rest of the chocolate do the rest of the work. My chocolate is freshly melted. I'm gonna start adding it a little bit at a time while still mixing on medium-high speed to incorporate it as quickly as possible. I wanna be careful adding something hot to this because I just don't wanna ruin all of that fluffy structure we gave. The key to doing it is to do it gradually. I forgot to mention one of the other reasons that I love adding chocolate to buttercream, which is that it keeps it really silky smooth while you're working with it, but then it can help it to set up a little bit firmer, just making for a buttercream that slices really cleanly and refrigerates well so that it makes it easier to transport the cake like we're doing today. Before we can start assembling the cake, I like to put some of this frosting into a pastry bag right from the get-go because I'll use it during assembly. Let's talk about some advice on how to fill a pastry bag. There are really two ways you can do it. One is using your hand and one is using kind of a guided assistance of something like a cup. Now, the cup is the easiest. You would put your pastry bag, I'm using disposable pastry bags, but you can also use reusable ones, silicone, fabric, cloth, whatever you've got. And you basically press the pastry bag into the cup and then open it, allowing the open part to drape over the sides. Then you can scoop your frosting into it just like this. This has an added bonus of being a great stand for your pastry bag while you're working because you can always set it back down in the cup. It'll stand up while you're working. I also like to use my hand just to hold the pastry bag instead of the cup, but this is a great way for beginners. When you get a little bit more advanced, what you want to do is basically make a C shape with your hand, and your hand is basically the same as the rim of the glass. You're going to drape the pastry bag edges over it, and then you'll use that C shape as where you hold the bag. So you can see the edges of the bag are draped over my hand on all sides and even up my wrist. The reason that I like this especially is because as I fill it, I can use my hand to help scrape the spatula clean. This is just especially helpful because when you're adding it into the cup, you're somewhat constricted by the shape of that cup. But like I said, both of these methods work and help you fill a pastry bag super easily. Before we assemble our cake, I want to take a second to see if my cakes need to be leveled or torted. Now, this isn't always necessary. It kind of depends on your cake recipe. It can even depend on factors like your oven, but I think these cakes are going to need a little bit of leveling to make sure we have perfectly even layers. Sometimes people are tempted to skip this step, but it actually makes building the layer cake so much easier. And on top of it, the crust or the outer part of the cake is actually the most textural element. It varies from the interior crumb. So removing a little of that top cake can sometimes make the cake overall taste more moist, more delicious. It's really excellent. So let's take a look. You'll notice that when I unmolded my cakes, I left them inverted. This is something that I typically do because then as it cools, anything that needs to be leveled will flatten slightly just because it's pressed to the wire rack. This is a particularly moist cake, so something I like to point out is you can always spray that wire cooling rack with a little bit of nonstick spray to help release the cake after cooling. Because as it steams, it can sometimes allow some of the cake to stick to the wire rack a little bit. Usually this isn't too problematic though, because it's usually the portion of the cake that you're going to level off anyway. So let's grab one of these and see what it's looking like. And as you can see, it did stick a little. You can see it a little bit easier here, but again, that amount I'm not worried about at all. And actually that cake looks so close to being level. I am gonna take a little bit off of it. The reason why you can kind of see at this edge that's darker than the rest of the cake, you can see then that this part rises up slightly. To level the cake, I'm gonna use a long serrated knife. The longest knife you have is going to make it easier because you'll be able to work through the whole cake kind of all at one time. Typically what I advise when you're torting is to make a line that's almost like a score mark all the way around the cake before you start. So what we're going to do is I'm just gonna make this score mark on the part kind of right at the edge. I'm actually holding the knife so it's touching the outer edge of the cake because I know that it's only that top part that I want to remove. And I'm just working around. Now I've created a score mark all the way around. As I continue to cut into the cake, I will just start to move my knife more through the interior while continuing to rotate my turntable. Basically what I'm doing is I'm not doing a sawing motion like this. I'm making long cuts and then rotating. And eventually you're gonna notice that your knife is almost into the center of the cake. And at the point that you've got into the center, because we're rotating it, that means we have cut all the way through. But I just like using these kind of long motions, continue to cut all the way around, and voila, we can remove that top part of our cake. Of course, I'm gonna save this for a chef snack, so I'm just gonna put it right over here. Actually, hold on, just for proof. Okay, let's do it again. Let's get ready to assemble our layer cake. Now again, we have a frosting and a filling, so I'm going to use the frosting that I put in a pastry bag to pipe kind of a retaining wall around the outside edge. This will keep the custard trapped inside, and it'll also serve as the base for our initial crumb coat for this cake. I cut a 1 inch or 2.5 centimeter opening from my tip. The idea is that I'll be able to make a tall enough retaining wall to get plenty of custard inside. I'm gonna start by piping a ring around the outside edge of the cake. I really wanna do it right at the edge of the cake, but not hanging too far over. It's also okay if you stop. You don't have to be an expert piper that can do it in all one go. If you stop, just press the pastry bag right into where you end and continue to pipe the ring all the way around. When we get to the ending here, I'll just kind of connect them. Stop applying pressure when you're done, and I'll just kind of pull it away. Now I've got my custard here that's nice and cool, and I have an ice cream scoop. This is a 1/4 cup ice cream scoop, which is pretty much the standard size that you'll get for actually scooping ice cream. It also is kind of a large cookie scoop. If you go to a kitchen supply store or a restaurant supply store, I believe this is called a number 16 scoop, but it's about a 1/4 cup. You also can just eyeball this, but I like to use it to make sure I have an even amount of custard in the cake layers. The goal is to fill it as much as we can without going over that outside line. So I've got 5 scoops, which is a 1.25 cups to start, and I'm just gonna spread it into an even layer. Okay, great. Okay, now I'm gonna place my next cake layer on, and I'm just gonna place it. I'm kind of checking to make sure that it's lined up to the best of my ability, doing that by just rotating. And then once it's on and I'm pretty sure it's in the right place, I'm just gonna press down slightly. You should actually see some of the frosting start to come out the sides when we do this, just a little bit. The reason that we're doing this press, we don't want to apply a ton of pressure. We just want to press to help adhere. And it's also going to let some of that excess frosting come out the sides, which is what we want. Okay, let's do it again with this layer. So far, while I've been building, the leveled or torted side of the cake has been facing up. But for the final layer, I like to do the opposite. Just to make sure I have as flat of a top as possible, I'll invert the cake so that the side that was touching the base of the pan becomes the top of the cake. Again, I'll line it up to the best of my ability, and once I feel like it's pretty well lined up, I'll press down gently. Now all I want to do is spin around, and I can see that there's a lot of frosting coming out the sides, but there's also a couple of places where there isn't much frosting coming out the sides. With whatever's left in my little pastry bag here, I just want to fill those gaps in. And you'll see why in a minute. Like I said, this is going to be the base of our crumb coat. So I don't have very many spots on this cake, but I'm just using it. Another thing you can do is look and see if you have some frosting left in the bag, anywhere that you see kind of some holes in the cake, just to help give a little extra frosting coverage. And then with anything that's left in the bag, I'll just squeeze it right on the top. We might need to use a little bit more frosting to apply a crumb coat to this cake, but I'm gonna use just this amount to start. A crumb coat is sort of a very, very thin, all over protective layer of frosting. What this does is it helps seals the layers together, and we're gonna refrigerate the cake after we crumb coat it. It basically makes it so much easier to frost it evenly later. Once you've coated it all over, I'm just gonna turn the turntable dramatically. Da, da, da. But what I mean is intensely. I wanna move it pretty fast. The speed at which you turn your turntable will kind of facilitate more frosting coming off onto your spatula. And it'll also kind of make it the most even layer. It'll allow you to see where else you might need some additional frosting for the crumb coat. And then of course, some of that frosting comes off onto the spatula itself, and you can use that frosting on the top or anywhere that you need it. I am seeing that I have kind of some naked parts towards the bottom and top of the cake. We really don't need much frosting here, so I'm just gonna apply a little bit more. And the idea is that there should be a very thin coating of frosting everywhere. And then in some places it's going to look thicker, but of course those are the places where there is frosting between the layers. Sometimes people frost cakes like this intentionally, and it's referred to as a naked cake. So you can, if you learn to crumb coat really well, you can just refrigerate it and be done with your frosting. Personally, I like more frosting. The idea is we're filling in some of the holes that are in the cake, like I mentioned. We're also creating a base layer of frosting. The frosting is gonna firm up in the fridge. And it's also called a crumb coat specifically because sometimes once you've cut the cake, there are loose crumbs. And we don't want any of those crumbs to get in the frosting of our final coat. So if any get in it right now, it's really not a problem because we're gonna put more frosting on top later. Okay, I think I'm pretty much done. I'm just gonna go around one more time. I'm really applying pressure while I spin because I don't really need any excess frosting here. And then we're gonna talk more about this move later, but I'm just sort of helping to flatten the surface of the cake. You're basically holding the palette knife or offset spatula parallel to the cake and just swooping across. Again, right now it doesn't really need to be that perfect. We're just trying to get even coverage. Okay, my cake is looking good. I'm just going to lift it off. Into the fridge it goes. My cake is nice and cool after some chill time in the fridge. This frosting is set so much that I can even touch it and no frosting comes off on my hands, or if it does, it's just like a little greasiness, more or less. So now I'm gonna start to frost. There's lots of different ways to frost a layer cake, but one of the most important pieces of advice is if you want smooth sides, you're gonna want some combination of these tools. This is the same offset spatula I was using in the early part of decorating the cake. This is kind of considered a medium offset spatula. It's about 8 inches long. What we're really looking for is something that is at least as tall as the cake. And it doesn't have to be too much taller than the cake for reference, but that helps you be able to apply pressure on all parts of the side simultaneously, which will help to give you the smoothest, straightest sides. Other things that people like to use, sometimes I'll use this, my bench knife. What I like about that is that this particular one is really nice and tall, so even when I have a huge layer cake, I can do it. It has a really nice sharp edge, so it's really easy to work with. But my new favorite tool that I'm using more and more is this piece, which is just made out of kind of a thick plastic. It allows you to move really easily to create straight edges, but also to scrape away any slight imperfections, like tiny lines. And as you can see, this one is just slightly taller than the cake. I've gotten to be a really big fan of this as time has gone on, so I mention it as well. You can also just frost a cake with any spatula you have, using the back of a spoon to make swirly swirls. But today, this is a special cake, so I want it to look as nice as possible. I'm gonna work on some straight sides. I'll start by applying the icing with my offset spatula to the sides. Some people kind of swear by frosting the sides first and then moving on to the top. Others start with the top, then do the sides. It honestly doesn't matter if you have a preference. Either way, you're kind of gonna have to go back and work with both parts at some point. I typically start with the sides because they take a lot more frosting, and that way I can kind of see what I've got to work with for the remainder of the cake. Okay, I've got frosting pretty much all around the sides. It's far from smooth, it's far from perfect. I'm just gonna go ahead and use my spatula to drop some on the top and spread it into an even layer. Then we'll work on smoothing the whole thing. I want to use kind of motions in my wrist to help spread the icing all over the surface. Then I'll show you kind of this move. I've been using the cake turntable this whole time. If you don't have a cake turntable and you want to make a layer cake, it's definitely still possible. You can put it onto a serving platter, something that's wider than the cake, and turn that manually. It won't be quite as smooth, but it still really helps you to rotate the cake while you work, which is so, so helpful. If you like to make layer cakes and you don't have a turntable, definitely invest in one because it makes the job so much easier. You'll think, man, this has been so hard for so long, and now it's finally so easy. So again, with this longer spatula, once I have some coverage kind of all over the surface, it's fairly even, but I need to even it out more. What I'll do is I'll place the spatula so the tip is sort of right in the center of the cake, and the whole blade will be touching out to the outer edge. And then I will hold and apply some pressure. You can see that icing is building up on the spatula here. That's some of the excess icing, but you'll also see that it's forming a smoother layer on the surface. So I'm just gonna keep doing that. See, the frosting that is excess that has built up on my spatula starts to fill in some of the holes. And then when I'm ready to be done, I'll just spin a little faster and pull away. So I have one little line there, but overall I've got a pretty smooth cake here, which is what I was going for, just on the surface. It can still have a little bit of work, but we're not done yet. So now I'm gonna do the same thing. I wanna just try to smooth the sides. First, I'm just gonna do it with my spatula just to even it out a little bit. This will allow me to see where else I need to put some additional frosting. Another thing I love about using the cardboard cake circle, since it is the same diameter as the cake, you can kind of touch your spatula or whatever tool you're using to the base of that cardboard, and that gives you a guide of exactly how much frosting you need. It's really kind of one of those things where you think, oh, I can do it without that cardboard, but it just helps so much all throughout the process. So when I mentioned that I want to smooth out and look for any holes in the frosting, this is what I'm talking about. See, there's some actual air pockets, holes here. I'll never be able to get the cake to look smooth without filling in all of those air pockets. So the first thing I'm gonna do is with a smaller spatula, go in anywhere I see an air pocket and put a pretty generous amount of frosting. Because remember, we're going to scrape it away. So I just wanna put, you know, a decent amount in all of those places, helping to fill it in. And remember, this is a pretty aerated frosting. So while I've been frosting, you might have even noticed there's a lot of large air pockets. As you work with it, it will continue to smooth out. So don't fret about it too much. I also have a special trick, of course, that I'll show you here in a little while. But the first thing we want to do is just help by filling those air pockets with more frosting. Let's start by using my super flexible tool and see how it works for us. I'm just applying pressure with my tool and continuing to work around. What's so great about this flexible tool is as the frosting builds up on the flexible tool, it helps to self-fill in all of the holes and air pockets that we find. So really all I need to do once I've kind of scraped the whole sides is reach a certain point and I want to stop applying pressure and pull away quickly. The important thing is to continue to rotate as you do this. If you stop rotating and pull away, there's always gonna be a line. But if you keep rotating and pull it away, you really minimize that line. And remember, even if you have a line, that can just be the back of the cake, or some strategically placed sprinkles will cover it up mighty fine. If you don't have one of these flexible scrapers, or if your icing is struggling to get smooth, that's when I like to bring in the kitchen torch. Remember, you can't use the kitchen torch with the plastic flexible tool, but you can use it with your spatula or you can use it with a bench scraper. And what I would do is just turn it on, apply some heat to the tool itself, and then use that tool to smooth. Especially when you've got a butter-based frosting, it starts to melt and soften the butter slightly, helping to smooth it out. And with anything chocolate-based, it's doing the same sort of thing, melting that chocolate slightly and just helping to make it extra smooth. Okay, we now just need to work on the top here. We can see that on this side in particular, we have kind of a steep wall of frosting. So I'm gonna use my smaller spatula to help me clean this off. I like to do this with as clean of a spatula as possible. So in between each swipe, I'll give it a wipe on my bowl and then also a wipe on some kind of towel. What I want to do is I want to move almost exactly parallel with the surface of the cake. The more I can move and keep it straight, the straighter that edge is going to be. So what I want to do is I want to start slightly above it, picking up that frosting, pressing it down towards the center, and then release. Scrape it, give it a little wipe, and we'll do the next pull. This is a little extra flair, but it's one of my favorite things, so we're gonna do it on the top of this cake. I usually use a small spatula for it. I'm going to place the spatula tip in the very center of the cake. Just so you know, for those of you, in case he uses this shot, when I look up here, I can see a monitor that shows me what this looks like from the top. So every now and then I'm looking up there to make sure, am I centered? Am I centered? Because sometimes it's hard to get fully over the top. But you don't have that at home. So you know what? I'm not gonna look at that. I'm just gonna try to center it to the best of my ability. Going in the center with the tip, I'm gonna start applying gentle pressure, and I'm kind of gonna hold this at an angle, maybe not quite a 45-degree angle, but we're not holding it flat to the cake anymore. So I'm just gonna apply a little pressure just with the tip, and I'm gonna rotate the stand very quickly. As I rotate, I'll move the spatula outward, and it creates a cool ridged kind of spiral effect in the surface of the cake. Now let's add some finishing flair. I'm gonna put the rest of my icing into a pastry bag fitted with a star tip, but you could use any kind of tip you have, and we're gonna pipe a fun little border. And I'm gonna raid my sprinkle collection and pick some extra special sprinkles to finish this cake off. I want to pipe a decorative border around the outside of this cake, and I thought it'd be a fun opportunity to show you how to pipe a continuous border. This is sort of a more advanced piping skill that's actually a lot easier than some people think it is. You're going to hold your piping bag at a 45-degree angle towards the cake. We're basically going to be running alongside the cake like this, holding the bag at the same angle the whole time. I'll start applying pressure, and in this case, I'm gonna do what's called a rope border. For that, I'm basically making small spirals, and I'm just gonna keep doing that all the way around the cake. The spirals will be touching each other, so from above, it ends up looking kind of like the coils of a rope. When you're piping, you want to apply steady pressure, but a lot of people's hands get tired and they get very nervous. They don't know if they're allowed to stop. But if you want to stop, just stop applying pressure. So see, I'm squeezing really hard. Look at what my hand looks like, squeezing, squeezing. Now I'm going to relax that hand. I've got kind of the tail of the piping, and I'm just gonna draw the tail down towards the cake. I'm just gonna wipe the tip off so that it's clean when I start working with it again. To continue the border, what I wanna do is kind of press the tip directly into where I ended and then start the spiral. You're gonna cover up with that spiral movement where the icing ended before. So I'm just going to put the tip directly in there, start applying pressure, and bring it up. As you reach the other side, when you want to end your border, what you're going to do, we're going to keep making the spirals, and when we make the final spiral shape, we'll take that same tail I referred to and draw it over where we began. Drawing it over will make it look like that coil is continuing with no real ending. So again, I'm going to stop. I've got my spiral. I'm just going to bring the tail over, stop applying pressure, and pull away. I have some slight imperfections in the surface of my cake, little air pockets that I'd kind of like to cover up, and I don't necessarily want to douse the whole cake with too many sprinkles. So I think what I'm going to do is do another continuous border, but instead of doing it as a border, I'll do it on the inside of the cake, kind of right in the center where some of those air pockets are. This also means I'll need less total frosting, because if I tried to do another one out here at the edges, I may not make it all the way around. I'll start applying pressure. I'll make my little spirals. And as I get to the end, I'll stop applying pressure and draw it to the side to release. Lovely. I think that looks pretty cute. I still have icing. I want to use it all. What's my problem? And now my favorite part, let's have fun, add some sprinkles for some extra flair. Look how cute our cake is. I'm so excited to package this up and serve it to the recipient. But for now, I want to just kind of prepare to remove it from the stand. And y'all ask me about this all the time. I know that's one of the scariest parts of making a layer cake. So while it's still sort of soft and at room temperature, I'm gonna take my small spatula and I'm going to put it under the cake circle, and I'm gonna work all the way around the outside of the cake while turning. The idea is that the frosting can really seal it to the cake stand. If I sort of make a line where that frosting meets the stand, it'll be a lot easier to remove it later. Once I've gone all the way around, I'm gonna transfer this to the refrigerator for at least 15 minutes to help it firm up. That'll make it easier to lift off the stand. Once, very early in my video making career, I made a crucial mistake. I made a beautiful layer cake like this, and I did not cut into it. And I just want to tell all of you right now, don't worry, never fear. I will cut into this cake, just not here, because I have to go gift it to someone. So for now, it goes to the fridge. Because I need to transport this cake today, I actually invested in sort of a special box. This box has windows so that we'll be able to see the cake even while it's boxed. I normally go with pretty plain cardboard cake boxes for transporting different baked goods, but this one is extra special because it also has increased height. This is something I struggle with a lot. Even if you just put fancy icing decorations on top of your cake, it won't always fit in a standard cake box unless it's pretty tall. So I really like this one. It comes as all one piece, you fold it together, and it comes with these clear stickers so that you can just adhere the base into place. It comes with an additional cake circle that you can put in the base of the box just to support the weight of the cake. And then when we're ready to put the cake in, we can slide it in right from the front, which makes it very easy to load the cake in. And then we'll be able to just basically fold it up like this. It's gonna be really awesome. And I just wanted to tell you guys, because I'm particularly proud of this box purchase. So I took that extra cake circle that came with the box. I put just a tiny bit of my leftover frosting on the bottom just to help adhere my cake circle that's on the bottom of this cake to this cake circle. And remember, we went all the way around with the spatula to loosen. So now what I'm gonna do is just kind of confidently slide under. When I slide under, you'll see right away you can lift the cake off. But first, I'll just go around one more time just to make sure it's fully released. Then I can just slide both the spatula deeper under and my hand under to support the cake. Oops, I did get a little problem there. Oh no, that's just the extra icing. That'll happen. So now, this is dangerous. I shouldn't do this. Don't try this at home. Okay, now using my hand to support the base, I'm going to slide the spatula underneath, kind of towards the center. I'll drop the cake down onto the cake circle, and then see now it's being only supported by the spatula. I'll just place it down, and when I'm ready to release the spatula, you just want to press down firmly with your finger on this edge and pull it out. Now I will just I'll choose kind of my least favorite side to put on the sides where there's no windows. And I'm just gonna slide it. What? You always have a least favorite side of the cake. Sorry, cake, but it's true. Just kind of holding the sides open extra wide. And I'll press it in. The great thing is this cake circle is the exact size of the base of the box. So at a certain point when you push it in, it won't go any farther. Perfect. See, it's gonna close just on it. So now I'll put these in. Okay, we're ready to transport this cake. I'm just gonna go change my clothes so that we can get ready to surprise the birthday girl herself. Okay, the cake's been loaded into the back of the restaurant. It's time to go surprise Annie. But first, a disguise. Let's do this.
What did you do?
Not too much. Oh, what is this? Annie? Is that you? Hello! Happy birthday! Can I hug you? Hi. Did you not recognize me in my brilliant disguise? I don't know. With this disguise, it's harder to tell.
It is hard to tell.
Yes, well, your mom wrote to me and asked if I would surprise you for your birthday. So this has all been an elaborate ruse. I don't do anything small, so. There she blows.
Thank you so much.
I'm so. Happy birthday to you. Woo! It's so good.
It's so good.
It's good? Oh, I'm so glad. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Happy Baking, where I made the perfect vanilla cake for a very special birthday surprise. Thanks so much to Annie's family for helping us plan this surprise. Thanks to Annie for letting me into her birthday celebration. And thanks to Jay of Wild Child for letting us film her surprise here. If you want to make my perfect vanilla cake, you can find the recipe linked in the video description below. And if you do bake it, be sure to comment and let me know. Use #HappyBaking. I love to know what you're making in your kitchens. And until next time, wishing you lots of happy baking.